is lit or light. Keep it safe and make sure there's no fire. Open to YouTube and look for Keds Fire Protection Answers.
Well, hi guys, we're going to get back into dry systems again today. We're going to talk about your 3-year test. Well, every 3 years, a dry system has to go through rigorous testing, where we actually shut off the air and close the control valve to make sure that we don't trip the system ahead of time, because we're going to do that later. And we watch that gauge, the air gauge, and make sure that no air is leaking from your system. We're going to watch that for at least an hour, possibly 2, depending on what we see. We're going to keep an eye on that. If your system does not appear to be leaking heavily or at all, then we'll do what's called a trip test. You don't want to do those in winter, especially if you live above the freeze zone. You want to do your trip test from the middle of spring through summer, through the beginning of fall. The reason for this is you don't want to leave water in your system. You want it to have plenty of time to dry out completely, plenty of time to exercise your drum drips repeatedly to make sure all the water is out of your system before winter. That's the point. It's a dry system. It's supposed to be dry when it's cold so that it doesn't freeze and break. That's why you have a dry system, because your part of your system goes into an area that is going to be very cold in winter. So we do the air leak down test to make sure that your system is tight and that there's no problems, no leaks, no pinholes. If we find pinholes, now we're going to write it up. We're not going to do a full trip. We're then going to write it up for, we need to have a leak investigation. Probably put peppermint oil in the pipe, pressurize it, and walk around in your attic sniffing. Walk around in the area where the dry system runs and look for leaks. We'll smell them first, then we'll use some soapy water and spray it on the pipe and try and find that leak. Once we find the leaks, we'll fix them. We'll either replace the pipe or we'll drill a hole where we find the leak to put in a mechanical T to fix that leak. Most of the time, it's because the system has deteriorated from the inside and that whole piece of pipe will need to be replaced. There are a lot of places that put on Band-Aids, which is basically a piece of rubber gasket and a hose clamp over a pinhole in the piping, which is very dangerous. And here's why. If the piping is gotten thin and you go to tighten down on that hose clamp and you tighten it down just a little too far, crush, now your pipe has exploded in your face because it's at 30 psi or higher, and you've tripped your system. And probably by the time you get out of the attic and get to the riser, flooded your building. So it's probably not the best idea to Band-Aid those, unless you're going to call the system offline with your monitoring company, isolate the system, drain down the air once you find the leak, mark it with a paint stick or whatever, then go up there, put your Band-Aid on or whatever you're going to do, and then get down, repressurize it with air, and go check, make sure that's stopped it. But know that that pipe is probably thinner than it was when it was originally installed. Not a good situation. So, you may also find that a leak is at a junction where there's a Vic coupling connecting the pipe, where that groove has been cut into the pipe or has been pushed into the pipe. That may be a weak spot and it may be leaking there, and there's not a lot you can do with that. It has to be replaced, along with that Vic coupling and probably the next section of pipe too. So, air leak down test to check for leaks, find leaks, fix leaks, and then we do a full trip test where we time how long it takes for the valve to trip, at what pressure does it trip, so somebody has to be standing in front of that riser looking at those gauges, and timing, and then there's somebody at the inspector's test that will then time how long it takes from when that system was started to when it sends water all the way to the inspector's test. So when the valve trips, how long does it take to deliver water to the inspector's test? So that's another portion of that test. That's why 2 people are required on 3-year trip testing. You cannot do it with 1 technician, unless he's David Copperfield and can split himself in half. So, all those things will be recorded. We'll check and see what comes out of the system. You know, if it comes out with flakes of rust or big chunks of rust and rocks and things like that, now we got to go back and flush your system. That's different. That's where we take the pipe off and we put on just an open pipe and a burlap sack, and we see what really comes out of your system from there. Because we're going to catch all the rocks, we're going to catch all the sand and the stuff that comes out, and we're going to then decide if we need to replace anything, if we need to do a further investigation, possibly do a 5-year IPI on the system at that time, even though we may have already done one, because a dry system requires 5-year IPI every 5 years, every system. If you've got 30 of them, we do all 30. We don't skip any, because they have a higher chance of degrading than a wet system. Wet system should have water on it. If the water is clean and there's not any trapped air in the system, your system should be fine. But once again, we're going to talk about dry systems. Dry systems get a little bit of water in them, and then they start to rust, and they corrode, and they rust, and they corrode. That's why we maintain them in a very dry state at all times. Best you can. Check those drum drips until they're dry every time. If you're consistently getting water at your drum drips, call your service company. Have us come out and see what we can find that might be the problem. You could have a leaky dry valve. It's just getting a little bit of water and it's condensating and then floating up through the system. And all that pipe could be rotted. So you really want to make sure you're keeping an eye on that. You're doing your drum drips. Watch this video about drum drips. And maintain your drum drips in a dry state. Very important. Keeping your system dry. If you start to notice hissing anywhere when you're working in the attic, shut off all your fans and listen and find that hissing, find that leak, and then call your service company and have us come fix it. You don't want your system tripping unless we're there. When we're there, we'll trip it, we'll dry it out as best we can, and then we're going to instruct you to consistently drain off any excess moisture from your system for the next few months until it gets cold, and then you're going to do it every week anyway, because you want to keep that system dry. If you have I've seen drum drips freeze and break with that much water. So that's all it takes. When water freezes, it expands, and that's what breaks the steel. Like these. Yeah. So you want to keep your system dry. That's why we do these tests, because we're checking to make sure that your system's going to stay dry, that it's not going to leak, that it's not going to trip in the middle of winter for no reason other than, oh, it deteriorated and there's pinhole because it wasn't kept clean. That's why we do the 3-year air leak test and 5-year, where we go in and we actually physically look at the insides of the pipe. Have scope cameras that go in there and look at things. Have a great rest of your day. If you have any questions, send me an email.
When you find your alarm sounds off in the night, don't make mistakes, give answers that are right. Keep it safe and make sure there's no fire. Open to YouTube and look for Kids Fire Protection Answers. Kids Fire Protection Answers. Got questions, he's got answers that make sense. Don't wait the channel to open his Kids Fire Protection